Hi, my name is Adriana Mangua, and this is my Paris Agreement project. The Paris Agreement, or Paris Climate Accord, is an agreement with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, dealing with greenhouse gas emissions, mitigation, adaptation, and finance starting in the year 2020. As of this November 2017, 195 members have signed the agreement, and 170 have become party to it. These are the objectives. Along with those objectives, there's an increasing the ability to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emissions development in a manner that does not threaten food production, making finance flows consistent with a pathway towards a low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. This is just a nice quote that I really think foreshadows the rest of my project. To start off with a little bit of history, the convention recognized that there was a problem. Essentially, it bound member states to act in the interest of human safety, even in the face of scientific uncertainty. The idea is that as they are the source of most past and current greenhouse gas emissions, industrialized countries are expected to do most to cut emissions on home ground. They are called Annex I countries and belong to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They include 12 countries with economies in transition from Central and Eastern Europe. Annex I countries were expected by the year 2000 to reduce emissions to 1990 levels. Many of them have taken strong action to do so, and some have already succeeded. Nonetheless, in the interest of fulfilling its ultimate goal, it seeks to help such countries limit emissions in ways that will not hinder their economic progress. One such win-win solution was to emerge later, when the Kyoto Protocol to the Convention was conceived. In summary, the Convention was the first historic step in global efforts to halt the growth of greenhouse gas emissions. However, it lacks specific qualitative targets and firm timelines for achieving tangible emission reductions. So, parties to the convention felt a need to strengthen the commitments, and so on, the momentum was created. It was not essentially a failure, it was more of a foundation. The Kyoto Protocol is an international agreement linked to the UNFCCC, which commits its parties by setting internationally binding emission target reductions. Recognizing that developed countries are principally responsible for the current high levels of GHG emissions in the atmosphere as a result of more than 150 years of industrial activity, the protocol places a heavier burden on developed nations under the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, which we can see with the developed, wealthier countries and the developing countries. But the Kyoto Agreement failed. The accord was a failure in large because the United States, which is one of the largest producers of carbon emission in the world, refused to sign the legally binding agreement. Countries like China and India were not held to the same standard as well. Ultimately, it was a lesson learned. The 2015 Paris Accord requires action in some way from every country. The Paris Agreement and its problem. In 2015, the 21st Conference of Parties adopted a new legal document called the Paris Agreement. This agreement categorizes countries' responsibilities as developed and developing countries rather than annexes, system of the UNFCCC. However, developed and developing countries are not defined in the agreement. This underdefined classification might cause problems during the implementation of the Paris Agreement. One of the problems might be about countries' resistance on keeping status quo, rather than ensuring fair burden sharing on emission reduction. Sound familiar? These proposals try to integrate economic and social dimensions while categorizing countries for sharing emission limitations. I would like to talk about all of them, but this video is supposed to be only 5 minutes long. So one of my favorites was historical responsibilities. It's based on the polluter pays principle due to cumulative emissions contribution by countries since Industrial Revolution. It basically says if you polluted, you pay for it. The current division of the countries in the UNFCCC does not provide equity for reduction of emissions. Researchers found a number of findings are common in all proposals. Kuwait, China, the UAE, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Brazil, South Africa should be recognized as developed countries in the Paris Agreement. Some countries listed in the Annex I, for example, Romania, Turkey, and Ukraine, should be downgraded from the list to ensure equity and fairness. it can be concluded that the differentiation of countries for developed and developing countries should be based on the qualitative analysis with dynamic review. In this manner, essential emission reductions can be globally achieved by all countries. Thus, the Paris Agreement classifications, such as the developed and developing countries, cannot be based on the current annexes of the UNFCCC. President Trump and the Paris Agreement. What just happened? And this is just a nice little political cartoon that I thought was very funny. And I just want to talk about some of the articles that I read, what they said, and I'll tell you my opinion on it. The overall Paris framework will probably survive without the United States. Essentially, it's a very equal document, and it will give a lot of countries leeway. The U.S. absence will take a real bite out of funding for climate mitigation. Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement means other countries will spend less to fight climate change. Each year that goes by will make it harder to receive the damage in developing countries. My opinion is that this could be another Kyoto Protocol incident, or hopefully, as latest articles have been reporting, he might change his mind. Thank you for watching my project, and these are the references.